Good evening. My name is William Harrison. I am the newly elected chair of SBE Chapter 37. I have Eric Hain with me, who is the co-chair, Fred Willard, who is the treasurer, and Rob Bertrand, who is the secretary. This is the newly elected board, effective December 2023. Welcome to our January 2024 meeting on why propagation. You know what? I have too much of my screen covered. Why propagation engineers Anita Longley and Phil Rice still rule the day, winning an FCC NCE challenge. This is being brought to us courtesy of Mike Starling from WHCP FM, formerly WHCP LP, I believe, who is going to talk about the trials and tribulations in winning a frequency allocation from the FCC in the recent auction. Fred, I believe you wanted to mention a few things about the upcoming Ennis workshops.
Yeah, I kind of got roped into it, but SBE is pushing harder and harder in education as a lot of broadcast groups have reached out and said, we just don't have enough people well trained. So we're doing a 2-day workshop, 2 parallel tracks. If anybody happens to be going to NAB or needs an excuse to go to NAB, the 2 days before the show floor opens, SBE is running 2-day workshops. I'm putting together with Dave Bialik the media over IP track, of which Andy, which is with us, he's under James, is one of the speakers. We're going to start with the basics and go all the way through cloud and where the industry is headed, and should be a really good primer for anybody that's up and coming, looking to management. We also have another parallel track, which is RF for IT people. Anybody that's really good with IT but wants to know the RF portion of a television or radio site. It's just 2 full days of RF. Very reasonable, $259. Covers lunch both days. I know, I think some of you folks here have been involved with Ennis workshops. As it turns out, locally here, SBE is also running one in May, another 2-day, along with SMPTE. It's the Bits by the Bay, which was run for many years with Weeby. Now SBE is teaming up with SMPTE to make it an official Ennis 2-day workshop, mostly video-centric this year. More details to come. It'll be in Chesapeake Beach, Maryland at the Rod and Reel, and that's May 22nd, 23rd. It's Wednesday and Thursday. There'll be good hotel rates there if you want to get away, but it's about an hour out of DC and about an hour and a half out of Baltimore. And it's always been a great event, and it's great to have SBE involved with SMPTE now. We already have more than half the speakers, and if you're interested in presenting, just contact us and we'll see if we can work you in. So that's the SBE educational Ennis part of it. We do have an educational meeting coming up in March, a bit of a field trip over to the high school radio station where I graduated high school. Kent County High School, WKHS, is having a 50-year reunion. It's 50 years of instruction of broadcast. That's where I got my first class license and started working on transmitters. And hundreds of people have graduated from that program. It's being partially funded by Wide Orbit and the other portion by Gates Air. Another reason for celebrating and having the meeting is that this high school program is now going to use the SBE CRO certification as part of its curriculum. So certified radio operator will become part of what the students need to graduate and certify and accredit themselves with the Board of Education of Maryland. So it's a good marriage between SBE and a Board of Education. What else about that? Jim Ragsdale from SBE National is going to come and give an award for 50 years of education service. Anybody's invited that wants to come over, but it is a bit of a drive. But we're going to have a 3-hour meeting over there, midday, Tuesday. And
What was that date again, Fred?
it is the 19th. It is day, and we are going to allow Zoom for the few people that, well, if you know Walt Barkus, he was one of the teachers there. I think some of you folks in the Lower Shore know him. He taught there, and he's going to be one of the speakers. Dave Van Dyke, have some folks from SIMTE coming over. We're going to talk about scholarships, try to get kids interested in broadcast because, as you know, the average age, I think, of the SBE members is about 60 years old. That's average. So I'm young for SBE. Anyhow, it's one of our media forward reach out. We do 2 a year with colleges, high schools. So again, it's a bit of a trek. It's Chestertown, Maryland, but you are invited. And that's what we're doing is on the education front. Anybody know about the February meeting? That's 15th, the day after Valentine's Day, Northern Virginia. It's about video.
It's fractional frame rates.
Fractional frame rates. Yeah. Why do we
Yeah.
need 29.97, 59.94? Why can't we just do 30 and 60? And Merrill
Yep.
Weiss and
Yep.
James Snyder and
Eric
Eric
Winnicott.
Winnicott. Yep. They're going to speak about that. We have backing from Everts and Hitachi. And that one is an in-person over at Channel 16 over in, where's that? Fairfax.
Fairfax County,
And we'll
correct.
have food over there. And that's about a 3-hour meeting, plus a tour of the facility.
Right, and the meeting will also be on Zoom.
It'll be a hybrid.
The tour will, I assume, not be on Zoom.
Yeah,
Yeah,
probably
that happens
not.
at 5:30. Yeah. The meeting start will be 6:45. And are we going to do broadcast in the law? We have done many other years. I think we're still contemplating that, right?
We're trying to do it. We're waiting to hear back from some representatives from Brooks Pierce to see if they're available on the dates that we want to do it. But once we know more, it'll post on our website, and hopefully we'll be able to see everybody there as well.
Yeah, and then May, I already talked about, is going to be the joint, probably the biggest meeting this chapter's ever done, the NS meeting at Chesapeake Beach. And then June, I believe, is still open. And July, we have acoustics, right?
Yeah, I
Still
believe that's
for
true. We've got a gentleman,
location.
Jordan Moran from Cullum, USA, who is the IAC representative in this particular area for IAC doors and windows. He's going to actually talk to us about acoustics a little bit. And we are still looking for a venue for that so that we can do it as a hybrid in person and on Zoom.
And we're joining up with Goddard Amateur Radio Club, as we have for the last 2 Augusts, for August 13th at Goddard Space Flight Center. It's going to be something to do with either Apollo or the New Moon mission and video. We haven't worked out the details yet, but that's what we're playing. And then the picnic in March. No, or I'm sorry, September.
Yes.
September, yeah. September.
It's going to be a good year.
Yeah, so we've got a full schedule. So I don't want to take any more of your time because you're here to see something else. But we have less money now because the food costs are higher, but still we're at about 6,000, somewhere in there, after getting the check back from the Christmas party. We spent a little bit, but we had 70 people show up, so that's fine. We're happy. We're happy with the turnout, and we're very happy with how the meetings are going now.
Yep, I think the chapter's in good shape, and we've got a good membership, and we've got good participation, which are all key factors to having a successful chapter.
Yeah, thank you all for tuning in. That's it. You guys have anything else?
It's a little quiet in the certification world, but this time of the year it frequently is. And William, I'll get with you because the other thing is we need to make sure that one of the things that I used to do as chair, and we need to get you on the email list from National, is when they add a new, obviously, if they have somebody that's taking an exam, you should get the same email. And also when they assign new SBE members to our chapter, I usually send out a little welcome email that basically tells them about the next meeting and a few other things. But the other thing is it's always copied to the the webmasters so that those people get added to the email lists.
Gotcha.
So it's a little bit mercenary, but it's been a little quiet right now. But there's been so many other things going on in my life that it was almost better not being overloaded with new members and new certifications. I can't remember the last time I checked what was new on the SBE national site, but if you go to SBE37.org, the national RSS feed is available as part of our events feed. So you can, if they change anything, we don't have to notice it. It'll show up on our website.
NAB is on pretty much everybody's mind at SBE National, and of course we'll have the meeting on Monday night as we always have. We will have the 2-day Ennis, which thankfully is now again part of BEIT and going to be promoted with NAB as a partner again, as opposed to us running it separately as we did the last few years. We're looking forward to much better cooperation with NAB. The Ennis will be in the West Hall of the Convention Center, so very convenient. So if you're thinking about going to NAB and want to get some extra training, if you're going to be there anyway, or if you need an excuse, $259 gets you the 2-day workshop. Also, if you sign up for the workshop, you get free visitors pass and a discount on full conference. So if you were thinking about being there for a whole week, better to get the package, save a few bucks. Yeah, that's my spiel on that.
All right. Well, I think that probably concludes new business, unless anybody has anything further. I think that we should probably hand the reins over to Mike Starling and allow him to get on with his presentation.
All right, let's give another pause here for cutting the video. Make it a little bit easier. Mike, it's all yours.
Can you hear me now?
And
Okay,
actually,
well,
the other thing I'll do, Mike, is
yeah.
I'll go in and mute all, and then I will unmute you. You may have to click on something to come off mute.
Okay. All righty. And we're back. Okay, so it's great to be back with chapter 37. I was debating with myself whether it was easier to take the elevator down from the 6th floor at the old NPR building at 635 Mass and go down to where we used to have a lot of the SBE meetings in the conference room, the boardroom there at NPR, or if it was easier today to just walk up the 2 flights to my little home studio here and join you guys. And either way, it's great to be back with you. So perhaps like many of you, when I got started early on as a radio person, I happened to be in high school and I worked for, this is up in Baltimore, and I worked for a general manager that I had very little interaction with, but I was convinced that anybody could run a radio station better than this guy. And I was stupid enough not to realize that that wasn't necessarily true. And but I plowed ahead, and after I got out of University of Maryland, I started a little AM station and had no idea what I was doing, but I got quite an education there. This was down in Amherst, Virginia, between Lynchburg and Charlottesville, and had always been fascinated, but then, went to KPBS in San Diego as the chief engineer, and then wound up at NPR, and then retired in 2013. And right as I was retiring, the LPFM window opened up, and I thought, Cambridge could definitely use a low-power radio station. So I applied, it got granted, and we built it. It was originally just going to be my iPod feeding a transmitter, but then I saw on, I think it was on a SBE listserv, actually, Shane Tobin had made a mention of taking some BMX consoles out of service. And I wrote him privately and I said, I love those consoles. I sure wish I could, get a hold of them. And next thing I knew, he had packaged them up and sent them to us. And so then it was like, oh, we've got to actually build studios now. So that's what we did. That was 2015. But we're here to talk about, I want to go forward. We're here to talk about, maybe I'm in the wrong place. Yeah. So we're here to talk about WHCP F&M, which, was subject to the 2021 NCE window. And as you guys have alluded to here, it's quite a different beast between the non-commercial band and did I do that or did you do that? All right. And the commercial part of the band in terms of how stations are allocated. So this is what we've got. William Harrison can tell you where to get a really cool, label like that for your transmitter, a rack panel that's nicely engraved and it's got your logo on it. And he also had a lot to do with us winding up with that transmitter. So I should really have a plaque in that room that calls it the William Harrison. It's not memorial yet. It'll just be the William Harrison broadcast facility, because he probably had more to do with us getting this all together and making it happen than anybody else.
It was all about you being in the right place at the right time.
It was. And you and a bunch of other people, some of whom are on this Zoom tonight, were right there as well. So on the right, you see that's the 2-bay, 6-around, 3-around 6025 log periodic array that we wound up installing. And it had to be a peculiar directional antenna because we were sandwiching in on 91.7 between WGTS on 91.9 and WBJC on 91.5, and then 91.7 co-channel WRTX in Dover. So we had a peculiar sort of teardrop pattern, but it was imperative that we be able to reach Easton, Maryland to the north of us with a 60 dBu signal. And we were able to achieve that thanks to this. Gray Hertig and the folks at Shively pulled this off, masterminding how to get that antenna done, and a lot of work on the test range. Initially, it looked like it couldn't be done, and then they kept working on it and came back and said, aha, we think we got it now, and indeed they did. So on a dark and stormy night, like tonight, this is a picture I took on the way back here to the house. I don't know about you, but I love transmitter sites when all the lights are off and you can see the Christmas tree effect of all your equipment humming along. It's always fun. It feels like Christmas. Okay, so just a refresher, most of you will know about Edwin Howard Armstrong, the guy who basically made our industry possible, and probably many other industries too, because he patented regeneration in 1912 at age 22, but his number one nemesis, he had two big nemeses. Is that the right word? DeForest was the first one, saying it couldn't possibly work. There could be no alternating current in the plate circuit. And then later on, he decided, oh, wait a minute, I think I actually invented that, and filed lawsuits against it. And DeForest won the patent dispute way later in 1934 after it had gone up and down through the courts. But then Armstrong had nemesis number two, David Sarnoff, and he made him absolutely rich because Armstrong, created not only regeneration, but then super regeneration and then heterodyne reception in the 1920s. And that's what made the RCA, I think at 3B was the first receiver that really launched AM radio broadcasting as we know it. And it got progressively better and better. And of course, RCA became mega rich, and Armstrong did just fine. He bought a nice apartment building up on the upper east side. But along the way, he'd become taken with Marion McInnes, and that's her picture there in the lower right. This was his wedding present to her. Talk about a nerd. he created this portable radio. The only thing portable about it, sort of like a Studer 269, the only thing that's portable about it is it has a handle. And so he hauled it out to the beach for their honeymoon in Miami and was able to play it. I guess it's got a big B battery in the bottom of it. But that was her. And she happened to have been Sarnoff's secretary. And I guess that's how he met her. And he was trying to impress her. And you see the picture there, him in the upper right, where he went on top of the building in, what was it, 1922, and balanced himself up there with his top hat on and suit and everything to impress her. And I guess he got, her eye, and they got married. But by the time of the Supreme Court ruling, when he lost the patent dispute with DeForest, he'd started work on the development of FM radio. And then later on, Nemesis number 2, Sarnoff realized that this better fidelity of FM would be a real threat to AM. So he fought back and got the FC to force FM to move from the original 42 to 48 megacycle band to 88 to 108. So he fought every single one of Armstrong's patents, and ultimately they were all decided in Armstrong's favor, but long after his death, because in 54 he was pretty much crushed by the mighty engine of RCA refusing to acknowledge anything, and he walked out of the 13th floor of his apartment building. So let that be a lesson to you, to not get too heavily invested in what we're doing here, that you lose all heart. So QRM Bedlam, you might say, what's this got to do with getting a radio station modernly? And here's what it has to do with it. So in the 1920s, in the aftermath of the Titanic disaster, the Radio Act of 1912 was created, and it gave the Secretary of Commerce control of radio licensing. But in 1926, the government lost the court battle with this crowd on the left known as Zenith Radio, which was the licensee for WJAZ in Chicago. And they were running hardly any power at all, and created this little van, and they drove around looking for the best place to put their transmitter on a better frequency. And they considered themselves pirates. You see them dressed up there. This was publicity photos that ran in the newspaper, which are really pretty wild and wacky, but that's the way it worked. And ultimately, the Court of Appeals decided that Zenith had a point, that the government really did not have, under the Radio Act of 1912, the authority to completely regulate the frequencies. And WJAZ was not told that they had to go off the air. And so all of this immediately got thrown back into Congress. And one listener wrote that the minions of Hades can be no worse than the radio noises that reach us here in Albuquerque, because everybody was operating on whatever frequency they wanted to. And the QRM, the Bedlam, was, all over the place. So they established the Radio Act of 1927. Some of you may or may not know that I think this is the most significant positive thing about Herbert Hoover, because he was the Secretary of Commerce at that time, and he led the charge and insisted that the radio waves were elements of national environment, and that they belong to all the people, and that therefore you could only have a license for it, and that they needed to be operated in the public interest. He said no one could be rightly offended for having to show that something other than naked commercial self-interest is at the heart of their broadcast operation. So the Radio Act of 1927 got passed pretty quickly, and the FCC, the FRC at that time, got busy reining in a bunch of the more egregious operators. I think their very first substantive ruling was to turn off maybe 7 or 8 stations and make some other share time. And the basic principle that they were applying was, most of you guys are just playing music. And that's not in the public interest, because anybody could go down to the local record store and buy records and hear music as they see fit. You're here to provide news and information. That was the original principles of the Federal Radio Corporation, or Federal Radio Commission, the FRC. All right, so we move forward. And quickly it was decided that there's a lot more here than just radio to deal with. So they, in 1934, after FDR was elected, they passed the Communications Act of 1934, which, as amended, is still the reigning policy in the United States for how communications are handled. And significantly, Section 307A said you can be granted one if in the public interest or necessity will be served. If public interest, convenience, or necessity, you can get a station license, right? But the allocation of facilities, here's the critical part, 307B. Fair, efficient, equitable distribution of radio service was the guiding principle. This was way back in 1934. So they started looking at where do we need to put stations? And as applicants would come forward, they would say, well, there's not a station here in our little town, therefore we should get a license. And often they did. But later on, as things developed, so here's a map from the 1920s that I had not seen before. A number of these stations, like WEBI over here in Salisbury, I can find no one that's ever heard of that. Some of these call letters, WCAP, WDEM, WIAY, we know WRC, of course, it survived, but a number of these call letters, people I know that are, been around for a long time say they don't recognize them. Those things did not survive, and no one really has any information about that station. I'm sure there's stuff in some history books somewhere, but, there was hundreds of stations. Baltimore, where I grew up, WCAO, WCBM, and WEAR, all those stations survived and were there when, I was a kid. So the commission was using comparative hearings for a long time, and it was basically a meritorious thing. So when I applied for my little station in Amherst, Virginia in 1976, there was 13 different exhibits. I think it was about 200 pages I had to type out on my little Smith Corona typewriter, answering all 13 exhibits. A lot of it was community ascertainment and ascertainment of community leaders about what are the most significant problems and needs. We had to show technical exhibits. We had to show that we had the cash on hand to build it and operate for a year with no income, so that they wouldn't be investing a frequency in some station that might not make it. But when others, filed against you, then you went into a comparative hearing. And those things got really messy and really confusing. And FCC Chairman Dean Birch in the early 1970s said, they're much like a professional wrestling match. The grunts and groans resound throughout the land, but no injury seems to result. So no one could really tell you who should prevail because it was a judgment call. So we get to the 1980s, and the FCC and Congress gave up and said, this meritorious service thing doesn't make any sense. We got all these administrative law judges interpreting things as they see fit. And ultimately, as you guys probably are well aware, on the commercial side, it became awarded to the winning auction. If you were willing to pay the most, then presumably that means that you understood the financial calculation of what that frequency is worth, and you would put it to good use, and you wouldn't risk good money. But on the non-commercial side, they weren't going to auction it off. So they looked around for, well, how can we decide who will win a non-commercial license? So now it's a series of points, comparative point award criteria that are based on technical and leadership and legal and ownership attributes. So who wins the non-commercial MX channels? With Michelle on here, she should probably be doing this part, but she'll get a chance at the end of it to correct me for anything I get wrong. But you get 3 points for being an established local applicant. I think you have to be, a local nonprofit that's been around for at least a couple of years. 2 points for diversity of ownership. It's not that kind of diversity. It just means that you have no other nearby broadcast station interest. 2 points if you're a state network or a tribal applicant. So if you don't have diversity of ownership because you happen to be a state network, for example, well, you can get those 2 points back because you are a state network. So, University of Maryland that has both WTMD in Towson and WESM down in Princess Anne would get the 2 points back if they were filing for a new station, even though they wouldn't qualify under the diversity of ownership. So, and then you get 1 point if you will serve 10% more people, and also I think more coverage area, or you get 2 points if it's 20% or more. So on balance, 5 points, this is my opinion, Michelle will say if she agrees or not, is pretty easy to achieve if you're trying at all, if you're serious about it. So every 10 to 20 years, the commission opens a non-commercial window and they continue to fine-tune the process based on how it went during the last one. And so the 2021 November window was 14 years after the last 2007 window. Now, interesting history fact that I didn't know about until later on was 91.7 was originally awarded to a Catholic radio entity in Annapolis, but it was never built. So that frequency was, still available that you could fit in your proposal. And that's what we did. So that's how you win based on points. But the important but is that 307B, the fair distribution rule for white or gray service, completely preempts the point system. And if you win by the point system, you have to go before the FCC commissioners and actually get approved based on the being the tentative selectee, I guess, at the Media Bureau level. So first and second NCE service, this is the white and gray service. That's the top allocation priority. So you got to provide NCE service to 10% of the people within the proposed coverage area, a 60 dBU contour, provided that your number is at least 2,000 people, according to the latest census. And if there's two of you that meet this threshold, that if one of you is providing the greatest such service by more than 5,000 people, more than the next highest applicant, you will be declared the superior one and get the decisive presence and can walk away with the frequency. So the 2021 window, there was 231 mutually exclusive groups, over 1,000 competing applicants, 368 stations were granted as singletons, that is, there was no mutual exclusivity. And Historic Oxford Limited was one of 13 bound up in this FCC MX Group 49, stretching from Waynesboro, Virginia to Cape May, New Jersey. So we created, actually we didn't create it, I revived Historic Oxford. If you get further down the MX group, let's say that there's two of you that are in the MX and you're forced into a timeshare situation, which is when the commission basically gives up and says you both got the same number of points and neither one of you is going to back off and let the other one pay your engineering and legal expenses. Therefore, we're going to force you to share time. Then it's the nonprofit with the earliest time that gets to choose first on their preferred day part. And of course, radio being radio, most of the listeners are still in the mornings. So whoever's the oldest entity chooses first, and you've still got the opportunity at that point to say, look, we picked the mornings and you guys have what's left over. So here's your last chance to just go away and we will pay your expenses. So that's why we went to the trouble to revive Historic Oxford, which was a nonprofit that was established to basically fight off a big commercial land development proposal over here in the town of Oxford. And once they won that battle, they no longer, filed their annual reports. So they went into what's called forfeiture. But forfeiture is different from dissolution. It means that all you got to do is file the new one, the missing annual reports. Easy to do online during COVID times, which is what we did. And you have to get the old board to sign off saying, okay, we'll transfer it to you. So that's what we did. Now, this is thanks to Michelle Bradley. I should probably have credited you on this screen, Michelle, but as we were going to get here, I was going to show you her fine work. And this shows the stations that were bound up and why. And I was like, oh my God. So only one would win potentially. And the one that looked like it was going to win was Lake Monticello. And here's Michelle's. This is from her RecNet tally. She tracked every single one of the MX groups in the nation and did her own analysis of which ones she thought was going to win. And Michelle was the brilliant engineer. We had 3 brilliant engineers working for us. Doug Vernier, most of you know Vsoft software. He did all the early work of helping us figure out what was going to be the location that would maximize the point award score under 307B. Gray Heritage was the guy that actually knew how to design the directional antenna array and help us get all that done on a real world basis. But Michelle was the one that understood all of this and was tenacious and super talented and a super hard worker. And Michelle is the one that pointed out Lake Monticello, Virginia, channel 218B. They had a first service proposal of 17,230. You see our first service proposal, well, originally, this had been modified by now, but originally we had 11,000. So they would beat us by the required 5,000. And they would have wiped out everybody else on the list unless they could have moved out to become a singleton. And Michelle was the one who said, oh, you know, I wonder if they even realize that if they move, I don't remember what the mileage was, but if they would move their proposal 20, 30 miles to, I think, the Southwest, they could become a singleton, and then they wouldn't have any of the messy complications of a potential petition to deny. So I called up their head, Mike Smith, out of Lynchburg, and talked to him. And I said, you know, when I look at your proposal and I look at our proposal, what they have in common is neither one of us would ever want to build this. It's obvious that we pick places out in the middle of nowhere to maximize the 307B score. And he started laughing. And I said, you know, I ran the calculation. You would pay more in your electric bill to build this thing than what you pay to run your whole station in Tennessee now. And he started laughing. And then I told him what Michelle had found out, that if you move a little ways, he goes, are you serious? Get her in touch with my engineer. And it was probably less than a week later that they modified, became a singleton, and that then, you know, propelled us up to be the top of the heap. And we were ultimately able to modify away from where we originally specified, kind of out in the middle of the nowhere, to get those numbers. We were still able to preserve our first service criteria award and move back to Cambridge, but we were going to be licensed to trap. This was critical, because if you're going to be licensed, if you specify the same city of license, then it's going to have to be decided otherwise. It's not a, well, I guess it could be a 307B, but I think, I think you only win a 307B. She'll tell us about this, if indeed it's a separate city of license, even if you have the superior numbers. Okay. So this was the homework that I did with Vsoft, with Doug Vernier. So I kept going to different tower sites and saying, why don't you model this one for me, looking for where to get the maximum 307B. And finally, at the bottom of the page, off on the far right, is the SBA. There's an SBA tower I found off a little place called Oldfield Road in southern Dorchester. And it gave us that 11,206 first service credit. And we were convinced that'll do the ticket, but we didn't know about Lake Monticello yet and being tied up with them and 12 others. So long story short is, one of the interesting things was when I was talking to Doug Vernier, I'm like, Doug, a lot of these numbers are actually across the bay. We're counting people in southern Maryland, Lexington Park, Lusby, California, places like that. They won't have anything at all in common with the people here on the midshore that we're actually trying to serve. And Doug's answer was, it doesn't matter. All the FCC cares about is the raw numbers, and that's the way this thing works. So did a lot of homework to try and make this thing happen. And this is from Michelle. She sent me this map. This is her subway map that showed who's tied up with whom about what. And you'll see there's only 2 with a number 1 circle. That means they had a first service priority, and that was us in Trap and Lake Monticello. And so she was showing that Lake Monticello was basically going to wipe everybody out. But at the same time, we were trying to figure out, how do we get our thing on the air, and how do we deal with this group? Is there any way to decouple? And this was some of the work that she did. If Priority Radio would decouple, if they would withdraw in Spotsylvania, then that would essentially decouple us if we modified and downgraded so that we were no longer tied in, as you see here with the, who's the other one, the Spotsylvania approach. Then we could become the winner over here based on first service priority. So that was a lot of, it was weeks and weeks of, what ifs. Now, this was an example that Michelle sent in to the people at the FCC to say, what if Station B voluntarily dismisses, and Station C, so that's exactly what we saw on that previous map. We reduced facilities, but we remain first service qualified. So wouldn't the bottom plot be operative? And the commission basically said, yeah, if it worked out that way, that would be true. So they confirmed her thinking of, here's how we decouple and here's how we win. Ultimately, we didn't have to do that because of the singleton moves that happened. So here's where all the experts were wrong at one point. One of them said, you won't have any competing applicants because no one lives on the midshore. But in fact, there was a total of 13. Another one said, hey, you've already won based on your superior technical numbers. But that wasn't true because we were actually bound up in the MX49 chain with 12 others. A third one at one point said, don't worry about maximizing your technical score. Go for the most economical transmitter site. Well, we never would have won without having the superior 307B count from a different city of license than anyone else. And another one said, don't use a highly directional pattern because building those things is a bear. And if you can't deliver 85% of the coverage area, you'll never be able to build it because you can't get the license to cover. And another one said, I think that's wrong. The 85% rule doesn't matter. You can always modify after winning. But the trick for us was, yes, we had to modify, but we still needed to get that 60 dB lobe up to Easton, where, is the second county seat here that's relatively affluent compared to the folks down here in Dorchester, where we can afford to live. So I just told you all this stuff, and there's our credit to Michelle Bradley, K3UE. She determined how they could move and make that all happen. And, as I told you, I talked to their GM, their president, and he agreed with us that, yep. So we were worried at this point that there would still be a petition to deny because one of the other applicants that was going to get wiped out was notorious about fighting and running up the legal and engineering expenses and dragging it out for years. They had done this many times over in different markets and earlier NCE rounds and could be quite problematic. But ultimately, they did not file a petition to deny. And so ours was granted on June the 2nd of 2022. Okay, so all of this relates back, Vsoft software, the other software that's out there, it all traces back to TechNote 101, the Longley Rice work that was done in the 1960s and 70s. The test range out in outside of Boulder is still there and still in use, Table Mountain. So here's what our pattern wound up looking like. You see this round circle in the center. Well, that was the 60 dBU coverage from the old LPFM. And you'll see that the 60 dBU here just conveniently is able to go up and touch Easton, but we've got pretty good setback to the northeast on the for the co-channel Dover station. And you'll see there across the bay to the south is coverage into Lexington Park and California and Lesby, places like that. We hear that there's a great signal over there, but that doesn't really mean anything because all of our focus is on the midshore, Talbot County and Dorchester County. We reach, all the way down to Salisbury. So the colors that you see here, if you've never seen one of Greg Hertig's maps before, this is his own proprietary projection. So the 60 dBu coverage is, the green line there that shows that for the directional array. But based on the interference criteria, so to the northwest, you see, we don't go very far. We don't reach St. Michael's according to this, because of WBJC in Baltimore and WGTS in Washington. So that's interference limited reception. And then the same thing happens to the northeast, where we actually pull in that portion of the pattern thanks to the Shively directional array. Okay, so basically, the good news is we got it done. The test range came through for us. And, the station got built. We went on the air last July the 15th. We did a sign-on celebration, too big for a single city. So we had 6 local music acts in Easton and 6 down here in Cambridge. And we tossed back and forth every half hour throughout the day, doing a nice little sign-on celebration. We always wanted to have a studio up in Talbot and Easton, and sure enough, a benefactor came out of the woodwork in late November and said, you know what, I know the perfect property for you right downtown, sidewalk studio space, and that they would pay for it for 2 years. And so we commissioned that in December, and that's where we now anchor All Things Considered every afternoon. And in the mornings, we still operate from our old flagship studios down here in Cambridge. We've got a radio reading service for the blind and an active student internship program, not as active as it was before COVID, of course. And kind of our signature program is our Midshore Midday Noontime Public Affairs show, where we interview all the local nonprofits and governmental representatives about what's going on in town and what's coming up. So there's the antenna array on the upper left. You'll see that uses slant polarization. This is the Shively 6025 log periodic. So all of the, at least the southeast and the southwest legs of the array pointed in those directions are 45 degrees slant polarization. But to get the coverage match that we needed in the pattern, we're actually at 51 degrees. And to limit the amount of power that was going northward, we had to have a 3 dB loss in the power combiner for the leg that's headed to the north. And, as you would know, if you've ever done a directional array before, there's a lot of things you got to do right, and all of them have to go right. Stellar Towers out of Delaware, plug for them. They did a stellar job, no pun intended, installing this baby. And it's nice driving around town where I get to look up and see it every day. So a bunch of things absolutely had to go right. Any one of these would have derailed the whole thing. So that the Shively test range pulled off what they said repeatedly for almost 2 months. They didn't see how they could get it to work, and they did. And then we had to have a structural analysis done on this tower. This was the old police company tower, police station tower here where the city administration building is, and hadn't been used much in decades. So we were able to get everything else off the tower. The structural PE out of North Carolina came up, KCI, and did the structural analysis and came back and said, that's a big array you got up there, but it's at only 93% of capacity. So you're good to go. And then Tower Structures put up the antennas, hooked it all up. Licensed surveyor had to come back for a final point. Those of you who've done this before know that you have to certify that each antenna is pointed within 1/2 degree. So it's got to be a licensed surveyor doing that. And then our good friend William Harrison saved our bacon with contacts at WGTS, being aware of a BE10S that they had taken out of service and had placed into storage. And we're like, oh my goodness, that would be perfect for us because we're running 6.2 TPO to get the 14 kilowatts ERP. And sure enough, they came through and said, sure, we'll sell it to you for a very reasonable price. And I got a van, went over and picked it up, brought it back. We got it in the room and got it hooked up. And once again, William came over and helped us do all the plumbing because we hadn't done that level of plumbing with a 3 1/8 inch line before. And then he also knew about, I think is it Matt at Sublight Engineering, who made multiple trips over here to prove that we had biohazard compliance to the FCC. They were particularly concerned about, I guess, Fred's, was it a niece or a relative there in that condo high rise at the
My sister.
Yeah, okay, your sister. They were particularly concerned about her, and he had to go over and go all around outside that building as well as on top of the city admin building with the meter and show them that the worst case, it was only, I think, 24% of the limit for uncontrolled for general public. And that's why it took all the way until early December for us to get the license to cover. And that day we were able to go up from half power to full power and turn the stereo on, because we've been running in mono to maximize the coverage, since we're only operating at half power under program test authority up until the point that they gave us the go ahead on the license to cover. So here's lessons learned just for what it's worth. I've been fascinated with radio since I was a kid. You heard that. Started a little AM station, could not figure out how to get it to make money. So one of the things I've learned over the years is you can't provide a good community service unless you control your board. That's the rule of 51%. You got to have 51% control, or a board that and is in your corner. And you got to have, positive net revenue, so that, you're not going to be beholden to someone that has to come in and save your bacon to keep you on the air. Odyssey is a good lesson in point, where they basically had to hand over, I guess, controlling interest in the stock to keep the corporation alive and reorganize, to the investors. So that's what happened. So we kept it small. It was just me and 2 of the other founders that have been around for 8 years on the LPFM. And so we were the starting board with Historic Oxford. We did a name change recently. We're now Mid-Shore Community Radio. That was a little less confusing for the people here in the public. And I'm happy to say we're cash flow positive, despite having to raise the funds and hire staff to be an NPR member station on day 1 when we signed on last July. And, credit where it's due, that rabbit out of the hat that William helped us do with our friends at WGTS, probably saved us half of what we've got in the bank account today. We'd have a much, tighter operation if we hadn't been able to save, $50,000 on the purchase of the transmitter to get started with. So as Ed Murrow said, in the final analysis, all that really matters is what comes out of the loudspeaker. And I fervently believe that we should be humble, be grateful, and learn every day. Every day I learn stuff. And, here's a look at some of the people behind the scenes at the station, all community volunteers and interns in a couple of cases. And the guy in the lower left, that's our buddy Doug Schutz. He's my alter ego running the station. He was engineer in charge at ABC's Good Morning America. And when he retired down here, he showed up one day and said, "Hey, I'd really like to get interested in the radio station and get involved." And he grilled me for 2 hours about how the automation system worked, and he pretty much promptly took it over thereafter and has been running the place since then, with my daily interaction. Lots and lots of good people here that you see on the screen. So that's what I got. And what questions do we have, and what corrections does Michelle have?
Are you running Rivendell?
The question was, what automation system are you running, Mike?
Oh, Rivendell. Sorry. Yep.
Yeah.
And that was another William Harrison suggestion. We were doing this system that I love the looks of. And as you engineers would know, don't buy a product based on the looks. So I bought one called Tune Tracker, and it was a disaster. It melted down like 4 different times. And so finally we took up on William Harrison's suggestion and migrated to Rivendell, and are so happy about it because it's rock solid and it does exactly what we tell it to do. Open source, no Windows required.
Yep. Yeah, Rivendell is pretty good stuff. We use Rivendell over here for some of our operations over here at J1. I did put, while you were talking, I did put some notes in the chat. I did put some footnotes in the chat.
Oh, good. Thank you, Michelle. And I've told a number of people, and I'm not just saying this because she's on the Zoom with us, but I don't think we would have gotten this frequency if it hadn't been for Michelle and how she just gets obsessed with what can and can't be done and will stay up. I guess you never sleep, basically, but I don't know when
hardly ever sleep.
I don't know when you found the pulling the rabbit out of the hat about, oh my goodness, if Lake Monticello will move, they can become a singleton, and that clears our path.
Well, this is what happens when you have your hand in every MX group across the country and you watch this stuff. And we built a that window tracker tool. You showed a screenshot of it earlier. That was I built that for the NCE window. We're currently using it now for the LPFM window.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually have all the window non-commercial and LPFM window history data in there going back to the year 2000 when since the Bechtel decision and the FCC started to do points and fair distribution and stuff like that for non-com, and then the LPFM service came along and kind of rode on the coattails of that with the point system. And so, so I've been, tracking all the groups. 2013, I manually tracked all the MX groups and took notes on everything. And this is what we do. We are a data provider. And, not only do I deal directly with the FCC on regulatory issues and trying to make changes, and you see my name all over the rulemakings and stuff like that. But I'm probably one of the biggest broadcast data users outside of the FCC.
I think there's people at the FCC that use yours, and I know I always go to yours because it's so much easier to get to our data that's at the FCC than attempting to navigate the FCC's website.
Yeah, the big comment that I get is we have FCC.today, which actually monitors, it actually scrapes the LMS site. It actually scrapes the LMS public view. And so so we get the information on all the applications that are filed, and we get it as they're being filed, not like the next day or whenever the next data dump comes down. That's why a lot of information is on there. And we actually go out, and for FM, we actually scrape the applications and we get all the application data, and we basically have a parallel to what's in LMS. And sometimes the information that we have in our system is not even available on the data dump. And so we have more information than in some ways. And, we've got some pretty good tools out there. I've been working on this stuff for over 20 years now, and we're loving every minute of it.
All right, I'm going to close off the screen share here and hand it back to you guys. Happy to answer any more questions. I see Richard Cassidy is here. Brian Shaw is here. Jonathan Chari. That's a real cast of luminaries here of broadcast engineering.
Hi, Mike. Can you talk about the tower?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So it's a Roan 55. It was built in about, I want to say 1978. And it was the police department tower. As a matter of fact, there was still old GE Motorola decommissioned radios from decades ago. They moved out and left everything behind. So there was a whole bunch of antennas on that tower. And the city was very happy that we would come in and take all that down, because the ospreys here would use those old antennas to sit on top of with their latest fish kill, and would drop the carcasses down into the parking lot, typically right when, the secretaries and everybody are leaving at the end of the day around 4:30, and these things would be landing in the parking lot. And they're like, if you could do anything to get rid of that stuff, it would be great. Of course, we needed to basically denude the tower anyway to get the structural, allowance that we were working on. So that's the way it worked out. And the city the city was very generous with us. They gave us an extraordinarily low rental rate, basically based on the fact that as the LPFM here, throughout COVID and all, and we'd always tried to be good doobies and do interviews, public service interviews with all the people in town. And during COVID, because we had 4 different studios, we could socially isolate people, and we used a little StreamYard application that allowed us to to feed out to everybody. So we would have in the police department and the health department, we did a whole series, probably 15 or 20 of them throughout COVID time, where the community could dial in, talk and ask questions and chat. And it was not only on the air, but it was also streamed to our Facebook page and our YouTube channel. And it was a really useful service, I think, for the community to hear the latest on masking requirements and what was open and what wasn't, and hear from the experts in the school system and all that. So I think that was why they're like, we'd love to keep you here in town, and by golly, we'll give you one heck of a sweetheart deal on the use of that tower if you'll stay here. And we're like, well, wouldn't want to be anywhere else, and we can serve the coverage area that we're trying to serve, thanks to the modeling of Shively.
And is the tower in the same place, or did you?
Yeah, it's the same tower. As a matter of fact,
you didn't have to. Okay.
Yeah, if you look carefully, you can see the old LPFM antenna is still up there. It's a Shively VersaTutor. And we picked that one because, as a LPFM, you're part 74, so you have to accept whatever interference might occur to you. And so we said, if we buy a VersaTuner and we have to move frequencies because of encroachment from a commercial station, we were on 101.5. So if anybody moved around and caused interference to us, we could potentially go off to a different frequency, and that VersaTuner could be retuned to continue operation for the LPFM. But it's nice to now have a protected contour.
Yeah, this is taken from right down my sister's house. But did you put a pattern up? I had to get up for a minute. Did you show the pattern of?
I did not show the pattern. I thought about that, and I would have had to go back into the application and find that actual pattern itself. I bet Michelle could grab it quicker than I could. But yeah, of course we had to file it, and it's a bit of a bizarre pattern that had to be achieved to make this work.
Well, just looking at the antenna design, looks quite like it would have some scalloping in it in certain directions. But
yep. Yeah, intentionally so.
Yeah,
they have a number of tricks. It's almost a black art. Those of you that know about directional antenna arrays, for the things that they can do with phasing and power dividers and stuff like that, and then playing with the slant polarization to tuck in a wing of the signal that they want to control well.
Did they actually put that on a turntable, or was it all computer modeling?
No, I think it was all computer modeled. If I remember correctly, it was built on a quarter wave basis, and they modeled it on their test range. And I think they probably did it with a single 3 series around array and got it where it needed to be, and then built it up at the full scale from that.
Was that Sean over at Shively that you were working with?
Yeah, that was Shively. We probably got, I'm sure it was one of the very last orders. They were talking to us in March of 23 before they had moved out and gone to, where is it? They're near Sacramento now.
They were bought by American Amplifier out in California. I was gonna ask you if you were dealing with Shively up in Maine or Shively American Amplifier in California.
It was Shively in Maine, and then we needed some data that was on the computers that had been transported out to California, and had to get that retrieved in time to do some modification to the construction permit and all. And but I have to say, Shively was great with all the hiccups and the machinations that they were going through in the middle of a sale. They said, get us your order by March the 23rd. And I think we got it in there on like March the 20th or something with our down payment. And they said, we think we can finish production in time to get it to you in June. It actually showed late June. And then we had to have a clear window of 4 or 5 days. And so I think it was July the 11th, thereabouts, that the antenna was basically commissioned and doing what it was supposed to do. And we were able to file for the license to cover. But, you know, then the FCC had a number of questions that we had to go back on, biohazard in particular.
Are we going to see a tower article, Leslie?
Well,
Oh, is that it? There's Michelle.
That's
yeah,
about what I
little
would
one,
expect.
little one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Is that
This
is that
off,
north at the top?
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, this is off the proof.
So you got Salisbury and Easton, not too bad, but
Right.
you're also heading into Blackwater,
Yep.
which
So
is
the
not
people down on Hooper's Island can hear us just fine.
yeah, Hopper's Island. You got to say
Right. And the bombing range at Bloodsworth Island, where nobody lives, could also
Right.
pick us up just fine if you happen to be a Navy jet flying over that.
It looks like you probably hit PAX too.
Yeah.
Oh,
Duxbury.
I could hear the station all the way out at Salisbury Airport. I've heard it in Seaford, Laurel. Pretty much as soon as you cross 13, you pretty much lose it.
Yep.
In a lot of cases, but especially like in Seaford, Laurel, Delaware, that area, just because that's where the null is.
Right.
But you know, but we've got
Going up 50 to Easton, it's very good. It's
yeah, oh yeah, oh
I
yeah.
picked it up all the way to Wye Mills. Pretty with I
Yep.
think a grade B to Wye Mills. So
Yeah, we get we've gotten reports from up on Ken Island and over in Edgewater, Maryland, on the other side of the Bay Bridge. I've heard it on the Bay Bridge, and on the Ken Island bridge, it comes in like gangbusters. But you know, an extra 30 feet of elevation is going to do that for you. And here's what's interesting for those of you, since you're in this region, the Tillman Peninsula. So we weren't really supposed to reach, according to Gray's predicted map, to St. Michael's, and that's an important small community, of course. But we do. But what you hear there is it sounds like the signal's getting noisy, and I'm convinced it's not getting noisy. You're hearing the iBox sideband of WBJC in Baltimore, 91.5, which is co-channel with us, of course, on 91.7. You hear the white noise that you know is fairly prominent. You can hear it there, but you still got a listenable signal to us for a little ways out on the Tillman Peninsula, and then that really kind of obliterates it. And as usual, all of you know that propagation is a probabilistic activity and enterprise, and depending on atmospherics today, you know, it can vary quite a bit, and depending on what radio you've got in your car. I'm surprised that a number of our donors happen to be drive Mercedes, and it seems like for some reason when you wrap an $80,000 car around the car radio sure performs a whole lot better than the one in my Honda CRV, for example.
Say, Mike, have you noticed during I realize you don't have a full year under your belt with that antenna system, but have you noticed height of summer versus now dark of winter behavior?
I think it's a little better dark of winter than summer. I think we get a little more you know, propagation inversion from other locations, and so yeah, I think it's a little better in the winter than it is in the summer. It's kind of with this large body of water here with the Chesapeake Bay, you'll certainly see effects from, you know, coming across from Washington, GTS, and from BJC.
and that's definitely a null towards Oxford and St. Michael's.
Yeah,
I'm guessing that because of the proximity, you're probably okay.
right. Brian Shaw is our chief engineer. He's on I see him listed here. He's the guy who keeps that 10S humming along. We thought we had a problem. Just interesting anecdote for what it's worth. We thought we might have a problem with the antenna because we were seeing increasing reflected power. Started out around 37 watts, something like that. And it would go up about a watt per week. And we're like, uh-oh. And got a message from chief engineer up in Pittsburgh, and he said, hey, for what it's worth, I had a heck of a problem with one of those Shively antenna arrays, and I had to hemorrhage a lot of money with the tower riggers going up and down the 1,000-foot tower to get to the bottom of what's going on. Keep your eye on your reflected power. And it's like, funny you should mention that. And he said it just kept going up and up and up and up and never stopped. And we started seeing that as well, and we're going, oh no, do we have a problem with the antenna? Well, turns out that it appears that what the problem is, and interestingly enough, it was Terry Dalton at Stellar Towers, the antenna folks. He's a good engineer in his own right. He said, you know, you got a 10S, and there's a notorious sampling resistor in the 10S that changes value and makes it look like your reflective power is going up, but check it with an external watt meter. And William was very good and helpful and insisted that we put in a directional coupler, so we were able to measure that and find out that that was an erroneous reading, that the reflective power was exactly where it was when we started out, and there's been no change. So worst case, at some point in the future, we'll have to go with the backup transmitter for a day or something, and poor Brian Shaw will be digging into the bottom of the 10S sometime to replace that sampling resistor, which I hear is a bear to get at. But so far, it's stabilized around 53 watts of reflective power, and it'll only start to fold back apparently if it gets up to reading something like 230 watts is what the factory told us. So knock on wood, we think we're okay. The most important part, it appears that the antenna is fine.
So you're running 5K TPO?
It's 5.6, right?
Mm-hmm. So if you ever did have the idea of going IBOC.
I missed that last part, Fred.
You ever did have a idea of going IBOC?
Oh, yeah.
You got the headroom there.
Yeah, we do. Right. Yeah, what I don't know is, I don't know if we can get the asymmetrical code load for that BE transmitter, because that's what we'd ideally like to do. We can actually turn up power more on the upper sideband, the WGTS side, than we can on the lower sideband. And that would be a smart thing to do, would probably help us with our coverage out on the Tillman Peninsula if we could, you know, go up to the full -10 dBc.
Oh, is that what it is now? -10? That's, yeah.
Yeah, that's what you can do if you've got the clearance for it. I guess there's a nice formula and calculation that probably owes its provenance to John Keene.
Oh boy, okay. Yep. He's not here today, but so you can go symmetrical. I wasn't even aware of that. That's
well, yeah, and that formula used to be freely available online, and it's not anymore.
Yeah. Oh, really? That's interesting. Okay.
Well, there's a rulemaking right now going on where all that's going to change, and pretty soon it's going to be the interfering contour for the 10 dBc is going to pretty much be the 54 dB contour. So as long as you make a 54, you'll be able to do 10 dBc. The FCC is also looking at standardizing and making it the norm to allow for asymmetrical. And so this is one of the proceedings that I've been involved with. And so we're, you know, of course, in some ways it's not going to help WHCP, because if was it WBJC over there on the other side, or
right,
is able to you know, is able to increase their insertion, you know, that might put a little more noise into Mike's fringe. So we'll just have to see how this all goes. But overall, I think overall on a national basis, I think it would be a good thing, and it will help improve the viability of HD radio.
It would really be interesting to see some modeling of the stations that have done asymmetrical, you know, just how well a fairly clear -10 dBc on one sideband, since each sideband can operate independently for full recovery of the HD signal. Be really interesting to see, you know, just how well it works out if you were effectively only really relying on the one that's in the clear, even though you had interference on the other one and you couldn't decode it.
I think there's some information about that in the FCC in the proceeding.
Is there?
in the
Yeah,
docket, and
I would
I
expect Xperi would have filed
yeah
some stuff on that.
yeah, and I'm pretty sure that Xperi and NAB, iHeart, would all be able to have all. I think iHeart was the one that did a lot of those studies, so you probably have to go back to iHeart and see what they have, or go actually just go to the NAB. I can get you in touch with them.
Yeah, I want to say that John Keene did some work with the NAB lab in order to determine how that would work as well. I don't want to speak out of turn if I'm misremembering something, but I want to say that he did something with the NAB lab on a project for that.
Seems like I remember that. I think you're right.
I work in TV, but I guess you have to back off about what 3 dB from your peak when you run the iBox. You need more linearity, right? Because it's you got
Oh yeah,
phase
yeah.
noise, and you can't.
Yeah, your
Yeah,
transmitter efficiency is going to take quite a hit to operate with that wide of a bandwidth.
and you're going to have a bigger power bill too.
Oh yes,
Well, you're generating two sets of carriers instead. Well, three sets if you count the upper and
right.
lower side bands. And one of them, only the center one, the analog is analog. The other two are OFDM. So
Coded orthogonal frequency division multiplexing, which when you learn how to say it real fast, is fun to occasionally toss into a conversation.
can I come to your parties?
Well, this is really good, and especially
Mike,
since it's a
sorry.
station I like to listen to, and keep the Latin music coming because that's what I like.
Mike,
Giddy
is
up.
your reading service on a 67 kilohertz SCA, or is it digital of one form or another?
You know, it's right now. It was on our SCA, and we did not move the Sidekick over to the 10S transmitter. We could, but so far it's been easier to just provide a Wi-Fi stream to folks. So it's actually a feed on at WHCP.org. It's one of the two streams that you see there at the top of the page.
Okay.
So for people that we're trying to get the Alexa app, we've got the Alexa app for the main station. We're trying to get the Alexa app working for the reading service, and then we'll just provide the little $20 Echo Dots to the blind and visually impaired, listeners, so that they could listen to it that way. Otherwise, they've got to go to the website and hear it, and that's opened it up for a lot of people. In the old days, it had to be all completely closed, but it looks like they finally gotten past the notion that there's a problem with making it open. There's been a number of stations operating it on open channels for decades now, and it's never really been a problem. So our FCC lawyer said, low risk, proceed. So we did.
This is a completely out in left field question. I'm curious. You obviously have multiple studio locations to serve the different communities. How do you handle getting all those signals back so you can?
Yeah. FTP, Audacity and FTP, two pieces of free software work wonderfully. And so in Easton, the guy who does all things considered for us is basically populating a bunch of carts that are automatically inserted. And Rivendell is throwing a series of macros to switch back and forth between the NPR receiver down here at the studio and, the Rivendell cart that's for a local insert. So it's easy peasy. And as William pointed out to me one time recently, he says, live is kind of a antiquated concept in today's modern broadcast world. And I couldn't agree with him more. Increasingly, it just doesn't, that live from NPR at Washington. Increasingly, I'm like, is that really just for your own benefit in the studio? Because I don't think the listeners care one way or another. Our stuff is typically recorded 5-10 minutes ahead of time and spooled right up. So it's nice and tight. It follows the cart before it, and it's seamless, and it sounds like a good, friendly air product.
And I just want to clarify that I didn't say like live doesn't have its place. That
No,
it's not a automated thing. It's a near real time.
yes.
So
Well, that's
it's
how
not live, but near real time.
our friends in the TV side, they were the first ones to get into the fact that their, digital encoding was now making the signal arriving at the viewer 15, 25, 30 seconds later. And so, the folks at the North American Broadcasters Association, those TV guys, Rich Friedel and, Glenn Reitmeyer and Joe Flaherty, those guys at the big networks that said, yeah, we call it virtual live now. It's no longer live. It's virtual live.
As long as the quality of the product is there, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only place you really get hit is like play-by-play sports.
Sure.
And you just learn to tolerate that. If it's an issue for you, it's like, well, it's an issue for everyone else, and who's
It
to
can
say
get
who's
very
liver than the
expensive.
other one?
In soccer, that 1 second can be very expensive. I got a question about programming. My background's actually with television, PBS. If you are a NPR member, are you then required to contribute to all things considered, or you just do that because
Oh, yeah.
you have
Yeah,
the
we
people?
have, right. We have to pay for the program. We have to pay for programming fees to carry.
Yeah,
So we buy the core programming, which is the 2 news magazines, Morning Edition, All Things Considered, and all the hourly newscasts come along with that.
but what there's an avail that you do go local? Because you said
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they've got a very sophisticated clock. So there's, probably 5 or 6 times through each particular hour that you have the option to break away for a minute, 24 seconds, 59 seconds. There's a whole bunch of places where they do a little pause so that you can cut away and run your local traffic, news headline, weather report as each individual market sees fit.
Mm-hmm. And I'm
Yeah.
wondering, I've heard your time, temperature. How do you generate that?
Oh, great question. Yeah, so that was a feature in the old Tunecaster system. And so what the computer is doing is, of course, looking at its internal NTP clock and triggering an audio file that was read by that announcer. So it says, it's 8:22. And then it immediately mates it up with which file has been pointed to by a comparison with the RSS feed for the local airport. And it says it's 8:22 and 56 degrees. So this guy sat there probably for 3-4 days recording each and every variation. So it sounds like a real human being, because it was a real human being. And by golly, he's on the air 24 hours a day, given the local time and temperature. And we like that so much that we had that committed to the GitHub for the Rivendell Unix, site where all this stuff is kept. So anybody could use it, and it's a pretty cool feature. I'm glad you asked about it. I'm glad you noticed it. The other thing we do that's a little bit different is all of our local IDs are read by members of the community. So every time we're out there, we take a little Tascam DR5 with us, and we've got a little script that says, "Hi, my name's Michelle, and I'm from Riverton, and I'm not always in Cambridge, but when I am, I only listen to WHCP serving the midshore of MD, a great place to be." So everybody's got this little script that they read, and we've got, I don't know, 300-400 people that cycle through the air product. It probably takes about a week to go through everybody that's in there now, but it gives a nice little community feel that, here's actual people in the community that you recognize their voice if you know them and stuff. And I think that's a nice feature of what being a community. We're sort of a weird community radio station / public radio station hybrid. Hopefully the best of both.
Yeah, I think it's the local element that sells it. I mean, NPR is what it is. It's okay. It's not bad, but when you pull the local avails in, that's when people, I think, are more interested in tuning in, at least from my part.
Sure.
Well, times have changed. At least you don't have to have 2 NAB Type C carts with the odd times and the even times
Oh, wow.
to get the time announcer to work.
That's pretty funny. That takes us back, doesn't it?
Oh,
Well, it takes some of us back.
good riddance.
Yeah, some of us are digital natives, right, William?
Yeah, just pot up WWV at the top of the hour. There you go.
Or say it, you Canada. Mm-hmm.
The problem is, by the time anybody hears it, it's 8 to 15 seconds late anyway.
Right. If you're running IBOC, right?
I see Bill tuned in. Are you down in Atlanta, Bill, or where are you hanging out these days? He may not be at the mic.
Yeah, the delay is always has always been a tricky thing, and now especially with streaming, we have the delays in there, and in California they're starting to work on this new shake alert system out there for doing earthquake early warnings. I've actually been involved with the Japanese earthquake early warning system. I've been developing stuff on that for many years now. I just actually was doing some development on that today. And we used to have our streams that I run are very widely received in Japan. And we do carry, and we in the past we have carried the warnings. And yeah, there is a stream delay. So sometimes the earthquake will hit before the alarm sounds on on J1. And yeah, it can get a little tricky. But yeah, streaming delay and HD delay are definitely a thing.
Before I forget and before we stop the recording, I just want to give a quick thank you to Jim Peck and SCMS for being the technical sponsor for the Zoom costs to keep SBE Chapter 37 meetings running, etc. So, Mr. Peck, thank you very much.
And he got us the sticks of copper that we desperately needed to get on the air with pronto. It was great.
Great company.
You're muted, Jim.
That button. You're entirely welcome, Mike. Always glad to help. And when William calls up, I tend to listen anyway.
We all do.
Who else?
He's like E.F. Hutton.
So one of the undocumented features of HD that, again, TV experienced this, but the public TV station that I worked at a little while ago, that there was always somebody monitoring off air. That station now is a hub for a bunch of public television stations, and they monitor statistically by exception instead of continuously. But virtually no one who's doing HD does any kind of real-time monitoring off the air. Specific example, I have a customer who did some significant upgrades to their audio network. And as a consequence, I was going through the market that I don't live in, and I was listening, and I said, "Holy smokes! The disparity between the HD and the analog is just horrid." And it was distorted, peaky sounding, really abrasive. And I called up the engineer. I'm not going to name anybody, but it turned out the engineer couldn't hear it, wasn't in a place where they could. And I finally got one of the consultants that worked on the station. I said, "Can you go up there?" Turns out my hypothesis was right. In the reconfiguration of their networking, they had taken a pre-emphasized feed and put it on the HD.
Mm.
And it was just brutal when the diversity when it switched back and forth between the blend occurred. It was not pretty. So people not listening off air, you can't fix that at this point. That's just gone. But that was just an egregious example of what in most anything that isn't analog radio, there's very little off-air listening done by staff. End of hobby horse.
Well, monitoring by exception is a tricky thing.
Well, that's the other thing, for if you're doing nationwide streaming, a lot of the stuff may not be under your control. The people who control the edge point distribution, uh, so that, when we started tracking that kind of stuff, it was like, okay, which, where are you? Which feed are you likely to be getting so that we know who to, point the finger at? It was, when everybody was getting everything off the satellite, it was easy. But then as soon as there was a lot of streaming, it was like, well, it's fine leaving here. And, if you have a problem and they genuinely want to solve it, you have to start hitting everybody who's, between you and the endpoint closest to where they're connected. Matter of fact, I never tried it, but I wonder if you could just keep changing VPN sites to see if you would get it to change. I never tried that.
Well, last thing I'll say to William and Michelle is, you guys made it all happen for us, and we're not worthy.
I can't speak for Michelle, but I was happy to help. Michelle, you're muted.
Okay. I was just gonna say is that, this is what we do over here, but also too, because you're in my backyard, you're near and dear to me, because WHCP, the LPFM, I'm exactly 20 miles away from that from the Cambridge location, and I can sometimes hear WHCP. There's one, the LPFM, because the LPFM was, I don't think it was running a full 100 watts. I think it was because of height. It was running a little bit lower, and there was like one magic place in my driveway where we did everything we could to make sure that we needed another full power non-com out here, and especially one that might do that does NPR, and I was hoping for a little more talk during Matt, and so I went with it, and but still, I'm glad to see that they're on the air and they are covering all the mid-shore, not just Cambridge, and they are definitely doing a service in an education.
This is a great station.
Yeah, of course, that's where our meeting's going to be in
Yep.
March. So
I'd like to come up and get a chance to see it. I've not been there, but I've talked to Chris Singleton, the station manager, many times.
Yeah, well, if you could come up, we'll give you the mic for a couple minutes and
No. Let the people who went there talk.
Yeah, but we'd love to have you if you can make it up.
Yep.
And I guess I'll throw in here our next meeting that we've already mentioned is that's the fractional frame rates is next, right, Fred?
Yeah,
That's correct.
After
Yep.
Valentine's Day, the 15th over in Fairfax. So those of you in Virginia, we're going to have some food from Manny and Olga's, which is not bad, and get to see each other in person.
I was at a conference in Rhode Island last month, and I got to go to the Museum of Broadcast Technology that's in Woonsocket, and or Brookline or something like that. And I mentioned that we were getting ready to do that, and there were a bunch of guys who had been in TV for a long time and said, "Oh, it'll never work. You can never get rid of them." And it's like, well, we're going to be talking about it. If you're ever up there, it's an interesting place. If you've seen the Julia uh, television show that's running on, I think it's on Max right now. they got a lot of the props out of that museum. And while we were up there, since the show hasn't gone out of production, a lot of the old equipment is still tagged for WGBH so that they can make the next season.
Yeah, those guys have a display at NAB, usually right out front in the hallway. If you want to see some of the gear, they refurbish it and get it running for the show every year. You know, TK-44s or earlier. And
I was stunned that they, you know, it was like 5 of us that were there, and they fired up two 2-inch quad machines for us, and it's like, gosh, do you guys really want to wear down your head stacks with just us? And they did.
reminds us of the old days when NPT had 10 machines because they were $150,000 a piece. It was a big deal. I think PBS had 10 also in L'Enfant Plaza, if I'm not. Andy probably remembers.
Yep. We had with the water line on them still.
Oh yeah, that was the afterward.
Mike, is there a big difference in running the station now than when it was an LP? I don't know.
Sure, because now we've got a number of professional staffers, so we've got a much larger budget than we had before when it was essentially all volunteer. So that's certainly been a sea change. And otherwise, I think the good news is, that was a heck of a head start to, have 8 years as an LPFM to really, learn how to do it and how to build up a cadre of like-minded people that you could count on each week to do their show and fill up the program schedule and fine-tune it. And, I feel really good about what we're able to do now. But if we were trying to do that right out of the gate, it would have been a disaster. We couldn't have come, it was really the perfect springboard. LPFMs, we went over and saw Al Schuldner and Jim Bradshaw, I don't know, 2-3 years ago, and gave them a little field report on what we were doing as our LPFM. And they seemed genuinely impressed and pleased with the progress we'd been making, doing what we could as a community service, as an all-volunteer operation. But, if I was to go back now, I'd say you should really look for the folks that have, done a lot of hard work if you can make it as an LPFM, then you should be able to make it as a full service station with a much bigger signal coverage and maybe have the resources to improve the service that you're providing to the community. I think, for us, it was a very good path. It was almost ideal, and the timing was just about right because I was pretty well burned out on the LP, but this is kind of revitalized my interest in enthusiasm and all for the next leg of the radio journey.
Well, you've got that lobe into Talbot County, so you have quite a bit of financial resources up there, and you're going to have.
They've been very generous. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, keep aiming at Easton, and if nobody's been to Easton downtown recently, with what Mr. Prager has done, it's as fine a quality of shops as you would have ever found in Manhattan. So probably vouch for that.
Yeah,
Didn't there used to be a station up there, WCEM?
CEI. Yeah, they're there.
Mm-hmm. Clark Enterprise.
96.7, I think. And I think there's sort of a country station. I don't know, but they're right there in town. They've got a 3-tower AM WKHZ, which I think is leased out to a Hispanic outfit. And, they're still active as a commercial station.
Okay. I think they still do okay. It was Clark Enterprises originally. I'm not sure who the owner is now.
Forever Media, maybe? I'm not sure. Brian Shaw would know for sure.
That's where Jim Hammond went after he left WKHS, and he built it out to an 8090. So I think they got to 6 kilowatts, and they were able to go up a little bit. So they really extended their range.
Right. And they're the only station over here that I can think of off the top of my head that broadcast in HD. So it's nice to see, my dashboard light up with a artist experience logo. I guess that's what they used to call that feature. I don't know if that's what it's still called, but otherwise I got to drive all the way to Washington to see WAMU and WETA and WBJC's, center of the dashboard displays.
Does WAMU and WBJC, do they still have translators on the shore?
I don't know. That was actually part and parcel of why we chose to join up with NPR, was because the WRAU 88.3 repeater for WAMU got sold to WGTS.
Oh.
So it's now, I think, WGTZ or something like that. So it was a religious outfit. And along the way, the Salisbury station that was an NPR member, that got consolidated with the Operation Delmarva Public Radio being operated out of Princess Anne, WESM. And so they had dropped their NPR membership. So between Washington, Baltimore, and Princess Anne, there was not another NPR station. It was like, right about the time you're losing WAMU and WYPR, there's a perfect hole here for us to fill before you're really picking up WESM. So we just thought it was a perfect natural fit to slide in here. Now, WYPR does have a repeater. I think it's WYPO in Ocean City. And I don't know that I've ever heard them over here in Cambridge, but, they cover along the beaches and all, I guess.
Yeah, I can hear them like in Del Mar and out that way. I usually listen to them like if I'm in Del Mar. They're pretty scratchy there, but they still come in. I mean, it's my need for midday talk NPR fix that I used to be able to get well served off at WRAU, which I'm really upset that that's gone. I mean, honestly, if I had the money, I would have bought the station, but
well, and Delaware State University tried to, and apparently, had a memorandum of understanding that they were going to buy it. But then I think the Seventh-day Adventists walked in and sweetened the deal by $100,000 and didn't have to do any financing, so it got sold to them.
WASM is still part of the school there?
Yeah, University of Maryland, Eastern Shore, right, in Princess Anne.
I remember when that was built out in the 80s. Bruce Wharton and Kathleen Karras, Chris Kimsey. That was a turnkey.
Okay.
So are they affiliated with the Salisbury station, or are they separate?
Yeah, they are. They actually operate the Salisbury station. So I'm trying to remember his name. Jerry Weston is the general manager down there, and he was previously the general manager at WSCL. And he had gone off, I think, to Long Island. And when he came back to WESM, I think that the folks at Salisbury University, for whatever reason, had a change of heart about how much they were willing to invest in WSCL and WSDL. And he made them an offer they couldn't refuse about, we'll just take it all down here and operate it for you. And I think they exchanged some money in some kind of fashion. But I think almost all the heavy lifting is done down at the Princess Anne station now for all three of those stations.
Okay. Because that Salisbury station gets out pretty well.
Yeah. It's got a good signal.
That's probably
if they had been an NPR member, I don't know that we would have chosen to say we definitely want to do that. But without them being an NPR member, there was definitely a signal reliability gap here that we were happy to jump into.
Did you look at any like there's a 106.3 tower there? Was that ever an option?
We looked at it, but that tower is perilously close to coming down in the next storm. It's pretty ancient. I think it was built in the early 50s, and it's right in the salt marsh at Great Marsh Park here. And Tinsley Meekins, the local tower guy, has told me repeatedly that tower is ready to come down. You could take a hammer to it and push it right through any one of the legs if you wanted to.
Okay.
I think
that's good information. Well, if they ever rebuild it and you get a good deal, you might get some height there, which you'd go down in power, but you might be able to get an equivalent, better signal there, maybe.
Yeah, could save on the electric bill perhaps, but you know.
Yep. And height is everything in FM.
It's the truth.
Or improve your signal in this direction. We could use the extra power in this direction.
I didn't realize you could get out so well at that height. What are you, about 100 feet?
No, it's about 100 and I don't know. I think the total height of the tower is it a 160 or 180, Michelle? I think it's a 160, and I think we're at about 145 feet. Center radiation. Yeah.
I mean, it's good, but it's better than I expected. I think a lot of it has to do with the gain of those
yes. Those yagged, right. We had to adjust the construction permit because there was more gain when they ran the modeling than what we expected off of that array. But saves on the TPO. I think we were expecting to run 6.3 and we wound up running 5.6.
So are you as much vertical as horizontal, or are you considered circular, or how does it?
We're considered slant polarization, which I had not had any experience with, but I don't detect any difference in the cars that I know that seem to be mostly either horizontal or mostly vertical.
I know on KHS, when we went from horizontal to circular, we had to double the power, but boy, did that make a difference. It completely eliminated the fringe, and there was no longer a fringe. It just goes all the way to the edge.
Yeah, that's great.
Just by the polarization. So.
Right. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. What is it they say about car bodies? That the car body is a field distorter, and all planes are tipped in perpendicular to the body of the vehicle. I never could quite get my head around that, but it sounds like, yeah, okay, I get it, sort of.
Vertical.
Well, kids, I'm gonna jump out of here. I've got family time here, so
thank you for your work, Michelle, on this.
Yeah,
we're all good recipients of the product.
Not a problem, and I appreciate this this presentation tonight. I think it was great. I think it's showing the value of non-commercial radio and what we're doing here. And right now we're going into the LPFM window. We've just gone through that. We're going through the aftermath of that right now, and it sounds like to me in maybe about a month or so I'll be experiencing a lot of the stuff that Mike was experiencing back in 2015. And
only you already know how to do it.
Yeah, well, we're going to hopefully have a grant. We have, the construction permit application is on public notice right now. So we're hoping to have the grant by probably mid-February. And the big thing we're going to need is our biggest obstacle right now is the tower. We're going to be building on we're going to be building on property, but I still have not done anything with the tower and with procuring anything on that. And so and especially with the crazy winds that we've had tonight, I'm pretty scared about putting a tower up here now. But that's just me. But I do appreciate everybody and Mike and everybody involved with WHCP doing an excellent job over there in Cambridge and in Easton. And Jim, thank you for supporting the LPFM community and everything that you do at SCMS. We're always happy to see SCMS at the Grassroots Radio Conference. And we're hopefully going to be sending a lot of package orders your way. So let's get some good LPFM packages together. And
here to help.
All right. Well, talk to me if we want to discuss it more, because like I said, grants are going to be coming first grants are coming middle of next month.
SCMS gave us a good deal on the transmitter for WKHS last summer, the Flexiva.
I was looking for you further down the log.
Yep. Well, hopefully we'll be back to join in one of these meetings. I usually hit the Baltimore ones, but always happy to jump on when needed.
Right.
All right.
I need to ring off as well. So
thanks, Jim.
Good night, everyone. Night. No problem. Thanks.
Good night from Riverton.